second webinar on the joint call defense, organized together with the FNR, Fonds National pour la Recherche, the Ministry of Economy, and the Directorate of Defense. My name is Rebecca Lemmer. I work at Lux Innovation as defense technology and innovation advisor, and I will be moderating this webinar, for which we will have several speakers. A few house rules for you. There's a question tab on the right where you can ask all your questions. We will have a Q&A session at the end. But before that, you will have the explanation on what are the main eligibility criteria and how to make sure that your proposal submission will be complete before the deadline of the call, which is the 14th of June. Other information that you would like to know, I guess the slides will be shared with you, and this call or this webinar is recorded, and the recording will be available afterwards, so you can always come back to it if you have questions. I will first present our speakers. So we have Julien Silverio from the Directorate of Defense that will he will present to you the different specificity and specific criteria that are in place, because this is a joint call specifically for defense technologies. We have Richard Nakhat from the FNR for the eligibility criteria for research organization mainly. Sophie Kleckert from the Ministry of Economy, who is our expert regarding the eligibility for companies. And then we have also Maximilian Schiebel from Lux Innovation, who will explain to you what you need to have in order for your project and your consortium, because it's a partnership we try to work on. So how you can have that all together and complete. This is the agenda. So first, the eligibility criteria for companies, the funding conditions for companies, research organization, and then the documentation that is required for the phase 1 submission procedure, how to have all this complete. And then the Q&A. Again, you have the tab on the right normally of the screen. Please write all your questions there, and we will run through that at the end. So if I can invite Sophie to explain to us the eligibility criteria for companies. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca, and good morning also from my side to everyone. So I'll talk about the eligibility criteria for companies. So for this specific call, we have two different types of criteria. So on the one side, the call-specific criteria, but also on the other side, the more general criteria to benefit from REI state aid. These are linked to the co-funding capacity of the applicant company, the economic impact of the project itself, as well as its innovative character and some generic criteria. In the next part of this webinar, I'm going to introduce more in detail the first, the second, and also the fourth of the more general criteria. So starting with the co-funding capacity, here it is important for the applicant company to justify that it has the financial means to realize the project. So it can justify this for different types of funding. They can be either individually or also combined for the project. These include equity, own funds, as well as loans from a bank, free cash flow, or capital increases. And in the end, it is important then to show the viability and the financial soundness of the contribution of the company. The next criterion is about the economic impact. So although these are research projects, it's important also to demonstrate the economic impact of the project itself. So it's not research for research, but the results should have a specific impact on the company. So these can be positive impacts on the growth or the future sales of the company, like developing substance in Luxembourg for the Luxembourgish entity in case of a group. These can be shown through business models of the expected results of the project. It can be shown through market entry strategies, can be shown through strengthening the positioning of the company by these findings, by these new findings, either new products or improved processes with respect to competitors and their products. Coming then to the generic criteria, these are again subdivided into several different criteria. The first one being the incentive effect. So here the general rule is just that it's important to submit the aid application before the project start. The motivation behind this is that the financial aid is supposed to change the behavior of the applicant undertaking. So this means that the applicant undertaking, in case of a successful application, realizes a project which it wouldn't have done without the financial aid. So therefore, in the context of this, or in general, it is not allowed to have contracts signed or any binding agreements before the start of the project. In this specific case, it is said that no company should, or no consortium member should start the project before February 2025. So it should wait for the communication of the final results of this call. Linked to different criteria, which are going to be explained later, is the SME analysis. So it's important to know which size of the company, which size the applicant company has. To find the size of the company is important that it's not only the applicant entity who's considered, but also all linked and partner enterprises. They are all added together, and the important categories are the staff headcount, turnover, and total balance sheet. You can find the table on this slide with the different thresholds for the different categories of companies, so for small, medium-sized, and large enterprises. There's also a link on this slide where you can find more information when you require it for the analysis of your own company. There are different categories of companies which need to be considered in this type of analysis. There's the linked companies, which are companies where the link is above 50%, above the 50% threshold. Then there are the partner companies with links between 25 and 50%, and companies where there's a link below 25% are not considered at all. So you should take into account that links can also be through direct or indirect control on the majority of voting rights or any other type of dominant influence you could have on another company. So regardless then of the percentage of the holding, you can still be considered a linked companies. The probably easiest case would be an autonomous company. So this would just be an independent company with either no participations at all or with only minority partnerships, which means below 25%, which are not considered in the analysis of the company size. For the autonomous companies, it's just 100% which are taken into account of the staff headcount, the turnover, and the total balance sheet of this single entity. Linked companies, which means with links between 25 above 50%, are considered 100% as well in the analysis, whereas partner companies are only considered as a pro rata, the FTEs, the turnover, and the total balance sheet. The size of the company then is important for this next criterion, which is the undertaking in difficulty. Generally, undertakings in difficulty are not allowed to benefit from state aid. So this is no exception for this particular call. There are different criterion which are linked then to different enterprise sizes. For all companies, excluding for SMEs, which exist for less than 3 years at the time of applying, there's the criterion that if more than half of the subscribed share capital has been lost due to accumulated losses, the company is considered in difficulty. Only for large enterprises, there are two additional criteria, which are analyzed over the past 2 years. There's first the book debt to equity ratio above the threshold of 7.45, and there's two, the EBITDA to interest coverage ratio below 1. It is important to check these criteria, and if you find yourself in a situation where you discover that your enterprise is to be considered an undertaking in difficulty, but if you plan to do some, maybe a recapitalization or some restructuring, which would resolve this issue, it is important to point this out in your application so that we have this information, and then also during the analysis and the instruction of your file, we would need then some proofs of this, how you plan on resolving this issue, to be able to take it into account and to not just refuse your application. For illustration purposes, we included on these two slides two examples of balance sheets or extracts of balance sheets showing two examples of undertakings which are to be considered in difficulty based on this first criterion of subscribed capital lost due to accumulated losses. So these you can, as the slides will be shared with you afterwards, you can find these back and have a better indication, a more illustrative example of how to make this analysis based on your annual accounts. And with this, I'm going to hand over to Julien. Thank you.
Julien, it seems that you are muted. We can't hear you.
Is my slide showing? I don't think so. So yeah, as I said while I was muted, I will explain the code-specific criteria. In this case, what about the dual use criteria of the various topics. So dual use, and why dual use? So the goal of this call is development and validation of innovation in dual use defense solutions that potentially could benefit the national defense forces, but this should be considered a bit lesser importance. It would be great, but again, it's a bit ambitious maybe. Then international defense organizations such as EDA, European Defense Agency, and NATO, the defense forces of allied nations, there are a huge number, as well as civilian research and local industry, which is the civilian part of this dual use. So projects should present two use cases. So when you submit, there should be very clear differentiations. What is the civilian related use case and what is the defense related use case? From the previous call, the first one, we noticed that the defense related use cases were a bit lacking, which was of course completely understandable, since a defense use case and defense mindset was not something that our national actors had a lot of experience with. So since then, many actors have a better idea of what the defense use cases can be like. So I'm pretty confident that we will have like better use cases. But in any case, if you have doubts, try to find some kind of expert who could validate or improve the use case that you want to propose. I can't be one of those experts to help you. That's unfortunately not going to be possible. And also, I don't think that the colleagues from Lux Innovation should be experts in this subject, since we will all be evaluating the topics and yeah, we would be informed too early. So, but there are some others around if you need information. So then the topics, as you saw in the documents, there are 3 pillars. One is smart mobility, the second one is resilient infrastructure, and the third one is strategic foresight and climate change adaptation. So I'm not going to go into the detail of all of those. They were quite well explained in the documentation. Again, if there are questions, please, if some of the descriptions were unclear, use the template here on the right the tab on the right to ask your questions, and we will answer them. But again, I think most of them were quite clear. But again, if you still have some questions, ask them now. In a few weeks, it will be too late. Then on the criteria about nationalities. So this call, as also the first one from a couple of years ago, is only open to national actors, so national companies and national RTOs. No foreign companies, foreign RTOs are allowed. So the restrictions now on the nationalities of the beneficial owner of the company and RTO, as well as the employees of both, they are restricted to EU, EEA, EUFTA, NATO countries, and NATO Indo-Pacific partners, which are specifically Australia, Japan, Republic of South Korea, and New Zealand. Now, I know that the question will come. So if you have an employee, let's say, who has a nationality outside of those, but also the nationality, so dual nationality, but also one that is in this listing here, at that point, that is fine. As long as one of the nationalities that an employee has is listed here, that is fine. Then, in case you have employees that are not on non-NATO, non-EU, non-EU, EEA, and so on, none of the nationalities listed on the slide before, at that point, you should take all the precautions to safeguard information related to this, to the project from those employees. There should be some kind of no use of one computer by multiple employees without yeah, you know what I mean. So, and then the origin of IP will be on the with limited to the same limitations like the nationalities. So IPs that origin from Luxembourg, EU, EEA, EFTA, NATO, and NATO Indo-Pacific partners are fine. Everything outside of this is not allowed. And then I will give the hand to another colleague.
Thank you. In this part, I'm coming to the funding conditions specific for companies. So in the table on the slide, you can find the maximum aid intensities for the different company sizes, from small over medium to large, for collaborative projects, which is anyway the case in this joint call. So there are 2 types of research where we have distinct maximum aid intensities. These are first experimental development and second industrial research. The difference between both is the TRL level and also the amount of risk and the amount of additional development which is required after the project has finished. So basically, the industrial research where we can have a higher aid intensity would be projects at lower TRL level where more risk is involved, so more risk of failure, more technological risks are included, and also after the project has finished, so after completing these industrial research activities, you would still have to do some significant developments to have a finished product or something which you can commercialize or really use. Experimental development phases then often come after the industrial research phases and consider activities at a higher TRL level where there are only minor activities in the development area to be done after the project has finished. So basically, you can say that industrial research is more the acquisition of new knowledge, and the experimental development is more building on existing knowledge, combining it and applying it to new areas or to new applications. For this specific goal, then the maximum aid would be 500,000 euros per project for the company side. And in specific cases, so for basically for SMEs and depending on their liquidity needs, there might be a 30% upfront payment, which is granted. For all the other costs, they are only reimbursed after the proof of payment, after they have been paid by the company and after proof of payments have been sent to the Ministry of Economy. The eligible costs themselves, they are only eligible costs which are directly related to the project. So these include, of course, personnel costs for the personnel who's working on the project. Here we include gross salaries on a 12 months basis, including social contribution of the company. Then for the equipment and material, there are two different types. So first there's the equipment, depreciable material and equipment. Here only the depreciation over the project's duration is taken into account. And then for material and other consumables, operating costs also taken into account. General costs, including project management and all administrative activities, are included in a lump sum. So these are 20% of the above mentioned costs. So there are no project management activities who are eligible as personnel costs, but they're all included in the general costs and the overhead costs. And then the final category of eligible costs are the special costs. These include subcontracting costs, consulting services, so basically for research activities or for other types of activities where you don't have the internal expertise and experience in-house. So you can have a consultant helping you out on this specific part, and these costs are also eligible. And with this, I hand over to next presenter, Richard.
Thank you, Sophie. I will present to you the funding conditions for the research organizations. And the funding conditions for the research performing organizations in Luxembourg are very straightforward. All our usual institutional beneficiaries are eligible for this call as well. The financial regulations are similar to our standard funding programs like CORE or Bridges, and you can find them in the financial regulations of our webpage. I just want to highlight two specifics to this call. First, there's a funding ceiling of 500,000 euros. And second, there is no dissemination phase after the execution phase of the project. Furthermore, only effective collaborations between companies and RPOs are eligible, and we can fund up to 100% of the eligible costs up to the mentioned ceiling. And lastly, there is a limit of 2 projects per PI. This means that one principal investigator is only allowed to submit 2 projects in phase 1 of this call. These 2 projects, however, can be together with the same partner, but with 2 distinct ideas behind. If there are any questions that cannot be answered in the Q&A later, please do not hesitate to reach out to me. And that's it already from my side, and I give over to Max.
Thank you, Richard, and good morning, everyone, also from my side. So you will see the slides in just a second. So before leaving the floor to all of you for the final Q&A part of today's webinar, I would just like to give you also some information on the general submission process of this first phase and also the mandatory documents that you need to prepare until the final deadline of the 14th of June at 2 p.m. So here on the slide, you can see a short overview of the required steps that your consortium needs to do before the submission. So once you have identified your partners, you should first of all start creating your project on the Research Industry Collaboration.lu platform, where you can invite your collaboration partners to the project, and at least one person from each partner would need to validate their participation. Once you have done so, you can then start filling in the mandatory questions of the project outline directly on the platform, and each partner would need to upload all their mandatory attachments. And finally, the very last step, once each partner has uploaded their attachments, you can then submit a proposal for the whole consortium. And here I would like to highlight, because we received the question already in the past, it's really it doesn't matter who submits the application for the consortium, as long as it is complete and submitted before the deadline. And although the project outline of the first phase is rather easy and short to prepare, I would really invite you to start preparing the application on the platform as early as possible to avoid any last-minute surprises and to give yourself enough time to prepare everything. So, as I already said before, the first phase application needs to be done completely on the Research Industry Collaboration.lu website. And to do so, you can simply go to the official website of the Joint Call Defense 2024, where you can start your phase 1 application by clicking on Apply on the right side of the page. And I also shared the link here in the chat so that you can easily find it after the webinar as well. Now, once you have started your application and all the partners have validated their participation, you can then start filling in the mandatory questions of the project outline. There are roughly 10 questions, more or less, that you would need to jointly prepare with all the partners. And in the end, in the last step, there's also the mandatory attachment section, which I will explain in more detail on the following slides. Now, for the research organizations, there are actually two types of mandatory attachments that you need to prepare and submit. First of all, you need to prepare a CV for all the stuff involved in the project. While it should be a detailed narrative CV for the PI of the project, a Europass format CV is sufficient for all the other employees working directly on the project. In addition, you also need to submit a declaration of honor signed by one of your legal representatives, for which you can download the template directly as well in the attachment section of your project outline. For the companies, the list of mandatory attachments is actually a little bit longer, but the first 2 points about the CVs and the declaration of honor are actually the same as for the research organizations, with the only small difference that for the companies, a Europass format CV is sufficient for all the employees working on the project, so you don't need to prepare a detailed narrative CV during phase 1. In addition, you also need to submit a few more administrative and financial documents, starting with a full legal organizational chart of your company and the group that it might be part of. And as Sophia also mentioned during her presentation before, it's really important that this chart is complete and reflects all the linked and partner companies, as well as the ultimate beneficial owners of the group, in order to assess the size of your company and the group that it might be part of. And then, in addition, you also need to submit then the 2022 and at least a draft of the 2023 annual accounts for the applicant company itself, and also the consolidated accounts of the group if your company is part of a group. And here, just as a reminder from the information session a few weeks ago, if you are part of a corporate group, but you don't have consolidated accounts, you should then submit all the accounts of all the linked companies within the group. And if your company or the group might be considered as an undertaking in difficulty, you should provide some supporting documents to demonstrate that you are already in the process of resolving this issue. So for instance, through a recapitalization of the company. So you could either add these documents as an additional attachment on the platform, or you could also share it within, for instance, the cash flow forecast there, which is the last mandatory document that each company would need to prepare. So for the cash flow forecast, it's important to say that it should demonstrate your liquidity over the project duration and also your ability to co-fund your project costs. And as we know that for startups, the cash situation can be a little bit more complicated, especially in the beginning, we would kindly ask you to prepare a detailed cash flow forecast if you are a startup that has less than 3 years. And for the more established companies or where the cash reserves are much higher than the project costs, you can also prepare a simplified version of this cash flow forecast. And as for the declaration of honor, you can find both templates, so the simplified and the detailed one, directly in the attachment section of your project outline. Now, before going over to the final Q&A part of the webinar, let me just remind you very briefly to also take a look at the replays and presentation slides of the webinars, which you can find directly by using the link here on the slide, or also the link was also shared in the questions tab. And please also regularly check the FAQ section on researchindustrycollaboration.edu, where we gathered the most relevant information for you that we received both within the webinars, but also by email. And yes, so with that said, I would like to wish you all the best for the final preparation and your submission of the project outlines. As we already mentioned a couple of times, the deadline will be on the 14th of June at 2 p.m. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask them either now during the Q&A session or also to reach out to us after the webinar, and we will be happy to help you. Thank you.
Thank you, Max, and thank you all of our speakers for the detailed information. We will now go to the Q&A, which has already a lot of questions. So the question regarding the slides and the recording has come up. I will answer it again. The slides and the recording will be available after this session has ended. There's the link where you can access it. This is exactly the same link where you can access the previous webinar that Max was mentioning, which covered the why of this joint call, and it's the information session. So if you are new to it and you haven't seen it already, please go check it. There are already some question answers there, and you will then have the full view on this joint call, how to proceed and how to submit the project. I will try to regroup the questions by thematics, so please also continue asking your questions in the Q&A tab. One of the questions on the, where is it? Here. If the entity that submits a project has to be a Luxembourg entity. So maybe briefly, and then I will open the floor to the speakers if they want. This joint call defense aims at promoting public-private partnership between public and private entities in Luxembourg. It is organized by Luxembourg entities, so Ministry of Defense, Ministry of Economy, Fonds National de la Recherche and Luxembourgation, and is thus open for Luxembourg entities and research organizations only, as it has been already said in the different parts. Do you want speakers to add a point there? No from Julien. No on the other side. Case closed. Um, so there was another one. Then we can go on the question regarding the nationality because it is also important there. So there's a question if there are restricted nationalities. So we have already some sort of framework, European nationalities, open to NATO as well, and NATO allied, such as New Zealand, Australia, South Korea, and Japan. But if there are no-go in terms of nationalities, example given were Luxembourgish, Russian, or German, Iranian. Julien, I think this question is for you, or these two questions are for you.
Yeah. So, as I said, as long as one of the nationalities falls under the nations that were listed before, it is fine. This is because we cannot exclude people just based on where they were born. If you were born in Russia and then at 3 years old you came to Luxembourg and now you have nothing to do with Russia, we don't want to penalize right now. Also, the topics here are not in any way classified or involve national security and so on. So we don't do any restricted nationalities as such. As long as one of the nationalities falls into the nationalities that were listed in slide 16, or I don't remember, it is fine for us.
Thank you. If you need more clarification on this question, don't hesitate to type it in the chat. There are also questions regarding if it's mandatory for companies to team up with National Research Institute, and this is a yes. And linked to that was a question about, where was it? If public RTO are eligible for participation. So yes, again, if the RTO is based in Luxembourg, would a consortium of RTOs university be permissible? And there we come back to the basis of this joint call, which is a public-private partnership. You can have a consortium with several RTOs, but you will need to have also a company, at least a company, in the consortium. It's not a maximum number, so one company or one RTO, but it's a minimum number. From the speakers, if you want to add something, please do. No. Okay. So I think we can go in the topics on eligibility, real one. For new companies, startups, is it fine if it's created by phase 2? And if you are already in the process in phase 1 to create the company startup, what detailed evidence would you need? I guess, would you need in phase 1 to justify that the company is in the creation phase? Should I open the floor to Sophie?
Yes, so it is possible that the company has not been established in phase 1, but you should start the process as soon as possible in order to be ready when phase 2 starts and when the aid are being distributed. We suggest to just submit all the information you have at the moment in phase 1, and then or reach out to us specifically with your specific case, depending on whether you're creating your company from scratch, whether it's an entity from a foreign group, just an entity in Luxembourg, or which other case could be concerned here. As these are very specific cases, it might be easier to get in touch personally and individually to discuss the case.
And in that case, Sophie, with whom do they get in touch if they meet with the research, industry collaboration email, or directly to the Ministry of Economy?
They can get in touch with us directly.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you. On this topic, on the topic of companies newly established, so established companies should provide 2022 and 2023 balance sheet and accounts. Having been incorporated in 2023, can you please confirm providing only 23 data is acceptable regarding the eligibility criteria? Max, do you want to answer the question?
Yes, thank you very much. So indeed, if your company has been established only last year in 2023, it's completely sufficient to join these accounts to your phase one proposal.
To John, regarding co-financing, what proof do we need? Do you need if capital raise is the way forward for phase one? Do we need this proof for phase one or phase two? Do we need term sheets, money in bank accounts, a simple plan forward, or funds the company is currently talking to? So how can a company demonstrate that they are working on their co-financing capacity? Sophie or Max? No one?
I can start and I let Sophie complete my answer. So I think for the first phase, the most important document would be to show the co-financing capacity would be the cash flow forecast, where you should provide also explanations of your assumptions with regards to the fundraising strategy that you have in mind, or also some other projections, maybe regarding the sales projections, your expenses, so everything that's part of a usual cash flow forecast. And of course, if you're currently discussing with an investor, for instance, don't hesitate to also add some additional information. This could be a term sheet. It must not necessarily be a term sheet. It's really, I would say, and I let speak on the control of Sophie, it's at your discretion which types of documents you can share during the first phase and which can be supportive of your assumptions.
Yes,
Sophie?
I think the answer was already quite complete. The basic idea would just be to show that you have the capacity to co and also to pre-finance a project. And if you base your cash flow forecast on a lot of assumptions, if you have some proofs available to demonstrate the veracity of these assumptions, it's always useful, of course, to add them. So it's your decision how you want to convince us that you are able to co and to pre-finance your project, and that it's really viable and realistic what you assume.
Thank you. There are no more questions regarding the funding, financing part of the company. Oh, no, there's one. Could you be kicked out of phase one because of lack of proof that you have the full funding capacity? Could it be a possibility? Julien is uneasy regarding that. So, Sophie or Max, do you have a form of answer?
I would say lack of proof, it would be in the same direction if it's really something completely unrealistic, what you assume, and you have no proof at all. Then of course the whole project seems a little bit risky and incoherent. If you, let's say, assume you have a project of a few million euros, you have nothing on the bank account, you have not yet a product to commercialize, and then you say, but next month we're going to have a few million by commercializing what we don't have yet, then of course there's a little incoherence and you risk to be kicked out in phase one. But as long as it's traceable what you suggest and what you assume, and you have some kind of proofs or justifications, there's no reason to be kicked out just because there's a specific notary document which hasn't been attached to phase one application. I hope this answers the question or gives a little bit more an idea of what's expected and what not in phase one. If it doesn't, please ask again or ask for some more clarifications, or maybe someone else can jump in from the others.
Julien or Max, do you want to add something?
I think from my side it was very complete, so nothing to add.
Okay. That helps. Thanks from our participants. So then we will move on another topic. Where is it? Which is the how to manage the cooperation between the private and public partner. So should the project be led preferably by the company or the RTO? Does it matter which organization leads prime the project? Sophie, Richard, if you have an input on that?
From my side, there is no preference. It should be ideally a collaboration that is as equitable as basically possible. But otherwise, the criteria stand that no partner can have more than 70% of the share of the total collaboration. That would be my answer.
Thank you. Then follow up on that. If you have three organizations, one private to public research, is the expected split of budget commitment three ways or 50% private, 50% to the two public ones? This is more, well, Max, do you want to take the question?
I'm sorry, could you just repeat the question?
Yeah, if you have three organizations in the consortium, one private to public, how do you split the budget? And this 500K, how is it split?
Thank you very much, and sorry. Yes, indeed. So if you are multiple partners, you would need to split the maximum 8 on both sides, meaning in this example where you have one private company, this company could get up to 500,000 euros of state aid from the Ministry of the Economy. But in the same consortium, you have two public research institutes that jointly could also ask for up to 500,000 euros from the National Research Fund, meaning that you should split the 500K of aid. Now, in terms of budget, I think, and I speak under the control, and that completes my answer by Sophie and Richard, of course, there's not an ideal distribution of the budgets or the work efforts between the different partners. As Richard mentioned, it should be as balanced as possible. But in the end, it's a negotiation and agreement to be found between the partners within the consortium, I would say.
I have nothing to add.
Okay. Sophie also,
Me neither.
good. Question regarding the upfront payment for SMEs. In the description, it said that upon justification regarding liquidity needs, Ministry of Economy may give 30% upfront payment to SMEs leading the project selected in this joint call. Does it mean that if an SME is not leading the project, it is not eligible for the upfront payment? I think Sophie is more on the area. Yes.
Yes, as long as the SME is a consortium member, it's eligible for the upfront payment. The justification would be rather based on the cash flow forecast to be submitted. So showing that it would be very beneficial for CSME to have the money upfront and not to wait until the first bills have been paid and the application for payment submitted and analyzed by the ministry for the money to be on the accounts. So it's not based on leading or not leading the project. It's rather based on the cash flow forecast.
Thank you, Sophie. Is it clear for our participants? I will say yes, if not, we will come back to it. There's a question a bit more technical. If the project consists in the creation of new prototypes, which falls under the industrial research, though we may bring on board stakeholders, propose showcases and potential business, this will fall under the experimental development. That's the question. If by bringing on board stakeholders, propose showcases and potential business, the project moves from industrial research to experimental development. I would say, Sophie, Max, this is something you know more about.
Yes, so it is completely possible to have a project which consists of both, so some industrial research and some experimental development activities. So when you split your project into your work plan into different work packages, it could perfectly be that the first work packages are considered industrial research. So in this case, it would be the creation of new prototypes, something acquiring new knowledge, something which has to be tested and validated and iteratively adapted afterwards with the stakeholders you're talking about. So these activities then, which are typically experimental development activities, could be included in the later work packages of the project. So there can then be a split. So every work package so some work packages can be industrial research, others can be experimental development. This will then be taken into account also for the calculation of the aid to be attributed.
Thank you, Sophie. There are no more new questions for now. There is one that I forgot. Question about having a lexicon and definition of each of the three previous topics on slide 17, which is the one on the different core thematics for the core topic. For this, I strongly invite you to look at the platform research industry collaboration.edu, where you have the entire core text, where you will not have a lexicon in the sense of a dictionary, but more information about what is expected and in which direction we are looking for project proposal. The link has been sent in the chat several times, but you will also access it with the recording and the slides again. So question that is not related to this joint call, so I will not take it for the call and for this webinar. I invite you eventually to send it to Contact Research Industry Collaboration, and we can then see how to reply to you. No more questions. You have on the screen the email address if later a question comes up, or if you are in the process of submitting your project on the platform and something is not clear. Don't hesitate to use it, send me questions. And no question on upfront payment we have answered for Bartosz. So yes, in that case, I thank you all for joining and asking all the questions. We will update the FAQ with some of the answers and questions so that everyone has the same level of information. Recording slides will be available online. one last question. Is it possible that a project could tackle more than one topic, subtopic? Yes, you can do a merging if the project that you want to submit requires it. And with that, I would also like to thank all the speakers, Julien, Richard, Sophie, and Maximilian for their time and answering the sometimes maybe tricky questions. And I wish all a successful project submission, and we really look forward to seeing all of these. Thank you all, and wishing you a nice day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye.